Hello there, Trek Profiles listeners. This is John, your host, with a warning before the show. You may have noticed the explicit tag for this episode, depending on how you're listening to this. It's not for language or anything like that. I always bleep that stuff out. But Stephanie, my guest, is a healthcare worker who was on the front lines during the recent pandemic, which I'm sure you are aware of that. In this episode, she speaks candidly about her experiences and some of the things that she saw and some of her responses to them. There are some harrowing tales in here, and the content may not be right for everyone, so please make the decision that's right for you. Okay, let's get on to it.
But in that moment, it was for me, it was like, oh, that's what it means to be a doctor. That's what it means to be a healthcare provider.
Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 79, recorded June 2023. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we chat with a Star Trek fan, we perform scans on their fandom, and we try to figure out why we all love this show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 79. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com for the email, or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. And here is your spoiler warning. This recording is current through the end of Picard Season 3. All previous content is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, Human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the doggedly doctrinal, docile, and domesticated, yet decidedly devoted M5 Multitronic unit.
The M5 is ready.
M5, show me the announcements.
Announcements on screen.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way you can do that is just to follow us wherever you're getting your audio. We're on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. Another way you can show your support for the podcast is to make a donation in any amount to our official charity here on the show. That's the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease. A donation helps as they are doing research to cure this terrible genetic condition. I talked about this more in episode 34 of the show. So if you're able, and if you'd like, please head over to trekprofiles.com/donate, and you'll see the link to give directly there to the charity. And I'll also put a link in the show notes too. Thank you so much. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. All that will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy it, or not, as you choose. At the end of every episode, my guest must face my Kobayashi Maru lightning round. They get 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they must give us their answers. And after each episode drops, I tweet those questions out as polls, where you can have your say. Let's look at the questions from episode 77 with Ross Webster and see how it went. Question 1, what's for dinner? Riker's omelet or burned replicated bird meat? Ross said the bird meat was for him, but the Twitter tweeps took the omelets by 57 to 43%. Question 2. We're stealing the captain's yacht for a joyride. Which one are we taking? The Calypso from the 1701D, the Cousteau from the 1701E, or the one we don't have a name for on the Cerritos? Ross chose the Cousteau, and it was the same online by a 51% victory. The Cerritos one got 26%, and the Calypso got 23%. Question 3. Star Trek villain Battle of the Champions. Who would win? The Borg Queen, Khan, or Vindicta? The Borg Queen was the choice of both my guest and the people online with a 61% tally. Khan came in at 23% and Vindicta only at 16%. Question 4. Least impressive Starfleet captain from these choices. J.T. Esteban, John Harriman, Ronald Tracy, or Larry Stiles? This question generated a lot of commentary online, and it was great to see. My guest picked Space Dock Stiles, but J.T. Esteban was the winner online with 35%. Stiles and Harriman were tied in the poll at 27 apiece, and Ron Tracy came in last place, which I guess if you think about it, might be considered first place, came in at 11%. Question 5. Which Star Trek technology would cause the most problems if it was invented tomorrow? The Tantalus field, the Genesis device, or the Thalaron generator? My guest picked the Tantalus field, but the Genesis device destroyed all opponents in favor of its new matrix at 50%. The Tantalus field got 36%, and the Thalaron generator came in last place, green with envy, at 14%. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. All right, I have a little bit of errata for you today. While editing the show, I caught some mistakes. At one point, I said show order, referring to an episode watch order, when I meant in-universe order. And at another point, and I think this is in the bonus materials, I said the Route 93 Festival when I meant the Route 91 Music Festival. I regret the errors. That's it for news, weather, and announcements. Let's get at it. M5, let's start the show.
Acknowledged. Transmission starting.
Her favorite character is Mr. Spock, but it's not the Vulcans. No. She loves the Andorians the best, but her favorite ship, not the Kumari. Oh no, my friends, it's the 1701-A. She's from the Columbia that is British in Canada, North America, Earth, and Sector 001. It's Stephanie Gerk. Welcome, Stephanie, and thanks for being on the podcast.
And thank you so much for having me, John. I'm very excited to have made it this far in my life that I get to be on a podcast like this.
Well, is this like peak Star Trek podcasting for you or something?
I think this is peak Star Trek life for me. This is the highest I think it's ever going to get.
I feel like you're putting a lot of pressure on me because my show, I have, very modest expectations and I aim to meet those. So the pressure's on now. But the M5 is a harsh taskmaster and he demands that I ask question one, which is, Stephanie, are you a Star Trek fan?
Is this a trap?
It is not a trap. Admiral Akbar says it is not a trap. No,
it's not a trap. Okay, then yes, I can proudly say that I'm pretty sure that I'm a Star Trek fan.
Pretty sure? What's the hesitation? Why not the full-fledged commitment?
Well, I say pretty sure because I kind of feel like there are maybe potentially some rules out there that I don't know about that dictates whether or not you're a fan.
This is my show.
Yeah.
And I get to set the rules.
Perfect.
And one of the rules on Trek Profiles is I ask you if you're a Star Trek fan, and if you say yes, that means you're a Star Trek fan.
Perfect. Then yes, then we're good. No pretty sures, we're good. 100% a Star Trek fan.
All right. Glad to hear it. Part of my mission here is to normalize Star Trek fans out in the universe.
Good.
So yeah, I want people to make the admission.
Yeah, we're a group that needs that sort of support, so I appreciate it.
Right on. So have you seen all of Star Trek? As we sit here in the middle of 2023, there's like 850 something hours.
Yes, I have seen all of it, every episode, every animated series. I'm making my way through the games and the books, so like extended universe stuff. I can confidently say I've seen it all multiple times.
So you're working your way through all the novels? All of them?
I haven't yet. I'm starting to.
Because there's a lot.
There is, and I'm doing them in timeline order. So I'm starting with the Enterprise novels.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so you're doing them like in show chronological order.
Yeah.
Oh, that's glorious.
Yeah.
I think that's actually probably an interesting way to do it because there's kind of sort of a more modern concept around like the Enterprise novels when they would have come out. And then as you get into like TOS, you're going back into the pocketbooks days, which is the ones that I read.
Yes.
And those are just glorious. There is some wild stuff in some of those books.
It's impressive, the stuff that they come up with in those novels, because half the time I'm sitting there being like, this is a real book that I'm reading right now. This is a concept that someone came up with. Because I also actually grew up reading the pocketbooks as well. Like those were the Star Trek books I read. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that there were books based on the other shows as well until I was much older.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what's the earliest Star Trek novel you remember reading?
Doctor's Orders.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, it was the first Star Trek novel I ever owned. Mm-hmm. And it was the first one I read, and it made a big impact on me because McCoy.
So little note just for the listeners out there, if you happened to have not read this one, basically the premise is Kirk and Spock got to beam down to the planet or wherever they're going. And just on a whim, Dr. McCoy's on the bridge and, Kirk and Spock are going to be back in like 5 minutes. They got to go, drop off an ambassador or, do something very trivial. And they're like, Dr. McCoy's in charge. We'll be back in 5 minutes. And of course, they're not back in 5 minutes. They disappear and McCoy ends up in charge of the ship.
Yep.
And because that was the last thing Kirk said before he went in the turbo shaft, he has to figure out what to do as the doctor. So that's the premise of the novel. And then, of course, there's shenanigans.
It's a great lesson as to like, this is why you don't put your CMO in charge and why you should be really careful who you put in charge before you step off that bridge.
Heck yes. There's a discussion we've had on the show before, but just so you know, I was actually in the Navy. And
I didn't know that.
yeah, and so I know a little bit about how things work, and I don't mean like the technology of a starship or anything like that, but just the idea that like you have a watch that you would stand, a particular station that you would work at, you have to be qualified to stand on it, and to you have to pass an exam to be able to work that panel, and then it's a whole process, right? And to be able to sit in the big chair, same thing, right? You saw a little bit of that with Troy in that episode where she's trying to pass the commander's test.
Yes.
Right. To get promoted. It's basically that, right? There's different tests for every job.
Yeah.
And McCoy would probably have never taken that stuff. So he would not be the guy.
I don't think they would even let him take that. They take one look at him and be like, you're immediately disqualified. You've seen how you operate in the med bay.
There you go. There you go. So, all right, glorious. So tell me, what was the first Star Trek you ever saw? Do you have a recollection of it?
It was the original series. I grew up watching all of Star Trek. My dad was a really big Trekkie, so we grew up watching the original series when it was on television, and we had all the VHSs. So that for us, that was the biggest one. Again, it was one of those, I had no idea that 90s Trek was even a thing until I think the early 2000s, where the Space Channel up here in Canada was like, oh, there's Star Trek. And I was like, what is this nonsense? Star Trek Voyager? That's not Kirk and Spock. What is this? I found it out the hard way because I guess my dad just didn't want me to know that a world existed outside of the original series and the Next Generation.
Oh, he was one of the purists.
Oh, 100%. He was totally a purist. He's like, nothing else matters. Sometimes Picard was okay. But most times it was just Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, the magic trio, them and only.
Yeah, I get it. I run across people like that from time to time.
Yeah.
We are very open and accepting of all points of view on this show, including those we disagree with. So I've even interviewed some people like that who have been on the show. So, okay, interesting. So when you're watching Star Trek these days, how do you watch it? Do you put it on a big screen TV? You're watching it on a phone? You're watching it with a group or all by yourself? How are you consuming it?
Well, things have changed, obviously, since COVID-19. But before that, I generally would watch it on my laptop. That's how I watched a lot of my television.
Streaming or with discs?
Discs. Physical media all the way. I'm a big physical media person. So I would get the discs. I'd go out, buy the season at a time, watch it. And then it came to Netflix, which was life-changing for me because then we could have Netflix watch parties. So now actually with one of my good friends who's an artist on one of the upcoming Star Trek comic books, Marcus Toe, me and him actually, and through the entire pandemic, have sat down and we sat down through all of Star Trek as a watch party, just the two of us together.
Nice.
And that's what we're doing with Strange New Worlds coming back this last week. Actually, now is that we're doing a watch party. So it's a smaller screen, so I don't get to see everything in high def, unfortunately. But my computer screen works just as good.
Oh, that's great. Because, when you're doing the watch party, I mean, it's not necessarily about the show. It's about being with the other people.
Yes.
So I get it. You can have that experience. And then if you want to experience the episode, like, with the full effect, you can sort of do that, right? I think that's wonderful.
I'm not going to lie. Most of our chats are just a lot of us yelling at each other, being like, where are the aliens? We're like, ooh, look at that ship. Look how pretty it is. Where are the aliens?
Oh, so you want more aliens in your Star Trek?
We want more aliens in Star Trek. We're like, just give us forehead ridges.
More head ridges, more bumps on noses.
Yep. We'll take it.
Yep. I gotcha. It's a big part of the show for sure.
Yeah.
Have you ever worn a Star Trek cosplay?
I have not yet.
In our various emails back and forth before we did the recording, you said you were just getting started on some. So that tells me something's cooking. So I think you got to spill the beans.
Yeah. So again, with my friend Marcus, Deep Space Nine quickly became our favorite show during the pandemic. And we loved the baseball episode.
Okay.
And so we are putting together a Star Trek Deep Space Nine Niners uniform. We've got the hats already. We're building uniforms, and that's going to be our first cosplay is the baseball uniforms.
Are you the Niners or the Logicians?
The Niners. I welcome anyone to go as the other team. They're more than welcome to, but I will force them to play a game of baseball against me then.
What will be the premiere of this amazing cosplay? Where could people come across you in this outfit?
I'm hoping for San Diego Comic-Con this year.
Nice.
If that doesn't happen, it'll probably be New York Comic-Con then.
Okay, so you're a Comic-Con person, so you're not going to be doing like the STLV thing in Las Vegas.
No, not this year. Not this year. Not that I've always wanted to go. I've never had the chance to. So we'll see. It's Las Vegas is just such a weird, no offense, place to me.
How dare you, madam? How dare you? I'm putting your name on my whiteboard right now. So say more about that.
I mean, as a Canadian, I don't understand Las Vegas as a city. It doesn't make sense to me. America just built a giant cities in the desert and then built a bunch of casinos and places to drink. And then people live there. It's like Cork's Bar.
It's very bizarre. It is absolutely bizarre. And
I'm constantly I come from British Columbia up here in Canada. So I'm used to mountains, nature, waterfalls, look bears and all this other stuff. And just outdoors is where you hang out and you go. It's a very rural country. So for me, I'm confused. I'm like, so what do you do when you go to Las Vegas?
Well, there's a difference. There's a difference between what the tourists do and the people who live here.
Yes, that's true. That is very true. I just don't understand how people live there all year round. I'm like, do you work? How do you live?
It is literally the most boring thing. It is the most boringest thing you have ever imagined.
Oh, that's so disappointing because I really had built up in my head this big idea of what Las Vegas looked like, a residential town. I just assumed you lived out of a casino.
What?
Yeah.
You're aware that there's 2.2 million people living in the city.
No, I was not aware. No.
I will tell you this, Steph. There are people who have no interest in Vegas, who are Star Trek fans. It's totally okay.
Yeah.
You fly out here. We have a great airport. You go to the hotel where the convention is. You stay there the whole time, and then you fly back home. And that's perfectly okay.
That sounds pretty amazing. You know what? It is not for lack of not wanting to go. It's just hard to justify. Okay, honestly, I'm scared.
What? Oh, tell me more.
I'm scared of Trekkies.
Oh no! Why?
Not like it's a bad thing. I actually have social anxiety, so for me to be like, I love Star Trek so much, and then to go to a Star Trek focused convention is terrifying because that idea is just well, I love all these Star Trek fans, and I know we already have so much in common. But what if they don't like me, and this is the thing that I love the most?
It's something we've heard.
It sets the bar. It sets the bar really high, and it's I would rather just have random encounters with Trekkies out in the wild, and then if they don't like me, that's fine. I can still go out existing my life. But if I go to a Star Trek convention and they don't like me, I'm that would break my heart. Not that would happen, but it would just it would break my heart.
I understand the concern. I can say this if I may, which is that we've heard this on the show before from some other people, and I've been going to the convention for many years, and I live here, so it's kind of hard for me to figure out to not go. Right? I mean, it's right here in town. No one spends the money to come here who's trying to hate on people.
True.
It's just not a thing on social media, on the internets. Hate is free. Mm-hmm. And so people feel free to be judging McJudgerson about, all kinds of things. No one spends, the thousands of dollars it takes to come to the Star Trek convention in Vegas because they want to be a jerk to other people. Yeah. It's not to say that everyone is delightful and everyone is, perfect and it's all, sunshine and rainbows, but I don't think you find so much the people that are like that. I think what I hear from most people, and this is a story I've heard over and over again on Trek Profiles, is people get up the courage or the gumption to come to the convention one time.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm going to do it, gold plated, right? I'm going to get the gold ticket. I'm going to get the autographs. I'm going to get the photo ops. I'm going to go to the gala. I'm going to buy all the optional, because there's all these optional things you can spend money on. Yeah. People buy all that stuff and they're like, this is going to be the experience of a lifetime, right? They come and they do all the stuff and they're like, well, got to start saving for next year. Because it turns out that they make connections with other people. Yeah. And they find a tribe and then they got to come back and meet up with their tribe every year. That's what it's become for me. I got to tell you, I have skipped some big panels, because it's not even about that for me anymore. I've seen some of these people so many times. Doesn't mean I don't love them, but it's just I've heard all the stories.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that makes sense. That's part of why like I go to San Diego Comic-Con every year. Exact same reason. I started out going because I was just a little nerd who wanted to meet other nerds. And now I go every year, and we're just there to have a good time. And I don't even find myself in the big panel rooms anymore. I'm too busy being out on the floor and talking with other comic book nerds.
And, as we record this, it's actually very sad that the Read Pop missions have ended.
Mm-hmm.
We are not going to be seeing those anymore.
Yeah. And you know what? I had actually been planning to go to the one in Seattle.
Me too.
Because it's close by. Oh, yeah. So we had all been planning to go, a group of us together, and then they ended up canceling it. So that kind of dashed our hopes for that.
So right now, the only official Star Trek event is the Star Trek cruise.
Yeah.
That's it. That STLV.
So Star Trek Las Vegas doesn't count as an official event?
It's not licensed, no.
Oh,
it's run by Creation, but it's not called Star Trek anything. The name Star Trek is not associated with it.
Right.
It's just called the 58-year mission, 57-year mission, whatever it is. That's the official name. And I think they may still refer to it as STLV, but that's a slang term. It's not like the official name of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I will say it's actually good. It's better.
Yeah.
That it's not, because here's why. You know what we're going to have this year at STLV? We're going to have an Orville panel. When CBS is in charge, you can't have an Orville panel.
Yeah, no, they're competition.
Every vendor had to be approved by CBS to be in the vendor's room. And, there were some people who might have been selling some cool stuff, but they weren't licensed, so they didn't get to go. So you're going to have more stuff in the vendor's room. You're going to have weirder like panels with like other weird stuff. So
I love that.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be good.
I'll add it to my list for 2024.
Yeah,
I'll
add it to the list.
Come out of my Canadian Hobbit hole.
There you go. I will introduce you to some fellow Star Trek nerds, and you'll have a great time.
The nice ones only.
Yes, the nice ones only. So, okay, so you got your Niners uniform, conventions. Yep. Are you a collector at all?
I am not really. Like, I'm a book collector, so I'm collecting all the books and the comics, but it's going slow. I've only started in the past 2 years, and I'm not in a rush to collect them all. So that's like that and like the physical media of the disc. So not really much of a collector, except for the books. I'm a big bookworm. You can't see it, but there are actually like bookshelves everywhere in this house.
That's great.
Yeah.
So tell me, why do you prefer the books to like the electronic versions? The Dead Tree version.
Ooh, because I like the idea that I murdered a tree to get this book.
How dare you, Matt? No. How dare you?
No, there's just something about like I actually do both. I read on both. I love the simplicity of the e-reader and how much easier it is to travel with. Mm-hmm. But there's just something tangible, and it's easier to get immersed. I feel like in a physical book. And something about having that tangible copy in my hands and also displaying it on my shelf like it's a collection. When I'm done, it goes on my done shelf. It's more satisfying. You know what the biggest get is for the physical book collectors? What? I might be overstating it, but do you know about the book Killing Time? It's familiar. No. Okay. Explain, which one is that? So it's got a picture of Spock on the front wearing a red cape, and it's a pretty good book. Yeah. It is controversial in history because there was a first printing of 250,000 of those. Yeah. And then Paramount wanted changes in the book because it had a little bit of a little Kirk Spock / fic kind of element to it. Good to know. So they were like, oh, no, we got to get rid of this, and so they there's only those 250,000 original copies. You can Google, like, how do I know if I have like an original version of Killing Time? Like, what do I look for, and like what pages do I find the differences on? Yeah, that's that, because I don't think you can get the original on Kindle. I think you have to. Probably, if it's Paramount, they're gonna lock that down hard. Yeah. So, but there's because of the way the books are sold, at least here in the U.S. Once they sell it to somebody, it's they can't get it back unless they go out and buy it on the open market. So there's original versions of that pocketbook book out there that you can go get. That is good to know, because one of my favorite hobbies is just to go into those used bookstores in small towns and being like, what do you have? So there you go. And there's a lot of Star Trek books out there.
Nerd goals. Nerd
All right,
goals.
thank you. You've just given me my holy grail.
All right, fantastic.
That and A Stitch in Time, actually.
Oh, Stitch in Time is fantastic.
It's like I have it digitally, but I want a physical copy so bad.
Oh, you can't find one?
It's like I can find it on eBay, but it's not the same. You know, it's like part of the joy of collecting is finding it out in the wild. For me personally.
Oh wow! Okay, so you're like an ethical hunter for your books.
Just because it's more fun that way, and it spreads out the purchases a bit. Because if I wanted to, I could go on eBay and like probably buy every like 99% of the books in existence right now. But this way, it's like when I go to a bookstore, I can hunt through them. I get to have that whole experience. I get to have the chase.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you're like those guys in Voyager, right? You need to go out and do the hunt, all that kind of stuff. All right, fantastic. It's interesting you bring this up because I just released an episode last month with Ross Webster. And when I said, what's the most interesting part of Star Trek that you might want to talk about? He came up with some Star Trek comics. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, God, like, where do I get these? Right. Because I have to watch or read whatever we're going to talk about. So I had to go find these Star Trek comics. Right. And I found them on eBay. I bought them and I'm showing it to him and he's like, John, you realize that's like one of the rare covers and you purchased it in like you probably paid like 5 times what you needed to pay to get that. I was like, oh, sorry, dude.
Well, now you're a comic book collector. There you go. Now
I'm a comic book collector. I got these super rare covers, because the thing is like apparently with comics, this is something I learned. You probably know this, but for my listeners, there's like there's 17 different covers for the same comic. Yep. And I got one of the rare ones.
Every floppy has a variation.
Yeah.
A couple variations. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't know. So I was in an pitched eBay battle to get this comic because I had to have it to talk to him about it. And it wasn't available electronically. So it was a thing. So if people are interested, they can go back to the episode with Ross Webster and hear me do that. By the way, it was the comics that was the X-Men Star Trek crossover comics. Those were the ones he specifically wanted to talk about, which were insane, which were nuts.
All their crossover events, it's like Star Trek didn't do them very often, but when they did, they were like X-Men, Ninja Mutant Turtles, Planet of the Apes.
My favorite part was when I opened up the Star Trek Transformers crossover.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, if the Enterprise like turns into a transformer and transforms, that's it. This is like 5 stars, like right now, And I turn the page, and what do you think I see? But the Enterprise transforming into a robot, called Tiberius Prime or something. And I was like, I don't remember the name right now off the top of my head, but I was like, that's it, 5 stars, amazing. It's like this is peak comic book right here. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to see anything in a Star Trek comic that's going to be better than this.
I cannot emphasize enough how much I think everyone should be reading the Star Trek comics, especially what's coming from IDW. It's like because they know what we want and they're giving it to us. They're so good right now.
So big promoter of the IDW stuff.
Right now I am, yeah.
And so are you a physical collector or are you reading those online?
Both. I'm doing both. When I do go to the shows, I pick up my physical copies because I like to buy them directly from the artists, the writers and stuff. So I pick up my physical copies from them. And I prefer trades over floppies, but I read the individual issues online.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, the M5 has prepared a list of episodes, Steph. I think we should talk about some of those. Are you game?
I am ready.
Okay, Steph. Well, the very first episode that the M5 says we have to talk about is not an episode at all. Oh, no.
Yeah.
It is a movie, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, coming out in 1982. This movie needs no introduction. So my question for you is, why is it important to you? Why did the M5 tell us we should talk about it? What is its significance in your life?
It traumatized me. That's why it's so significant. I think it was early stages childhood trauma where it was finally came about, because at this point in my life, I was probably about 10 years old when I saw Wrath of Khan for the first time. And I'm going to date myself here, probably about 2001. I was very sick that summer. I was very, very ill. So my dad moved the little television and VHS, brought it downstairs to the bedroom for me, and he set it up and he handed me a stack of Star Trek VHSs to watch. And he's like, okay, watch them in these order. And I was like, okay. And then I noticed that some of them were movies. And I was like, oh, I'd never seen these before. I popped the first one in. It's the motion picture. Great time. Second one, Wrath of Khan. Spock dies. And I remember being 10 years old. It is such a core memory, being 10 years old, sobbing in front of this little tiny TV screen. I'm already sick. Like, I'm just like your deathly little pale 10-year-old girl. And I'm having a breakdown because one of my favorite fictional characters has died. And I had no idea that there were more movies coming afterwards to fix that.
Oh, goodness.
And at that point in my life, I was like, I'm so invested. This is a part of my life now. I was forever angry at my father, by the way. I definitely held this against him later on in life, and I got revenge for that. But at that point in life, I knew, I was like, this is what it feels to connect with something fictional and have it impact your life so much that you can't ever let it go. And that's all it took, was Leonard Nimoy being absolutely amazing in his final scenes. And to this day, I can't sit through Wrath of Khan without bawling my eyes out like I'm 10 years old again.
Two things I want to call attention to. First of all, I think your dad learned of that move from the original series Space Seed, like when Khan's in bed and he brings him the library tapes.
Yeah.
And he's like, you can read the library tapes while you're lying in bed, right? So
yeah.
I think that's where your dad probably got that from. I don't know if he's a big Trek fan. That's probably where that came from.
Probably. It is one of his favorite ones, yeah.
But the interesting observation, at least I hope, that I'd like to explore for just a second is this idea that you watched Wrath of Khan and one of your favorite characters in the show dies. I could easily see the natural reaction to be, I'm going to turn this off and never watch it again. But yours was the opposite. So I want to understand sort of how that went for you.
Yeah, so these were like old VHSs. I'm not paying attention to names, so I'm not seeing like The Search for Spock, The Voyage Home, or any of that stuff. I'm just seeing that I want to go back in time and continue to relive these adventures with these characters, even though Spock's death, because I think that was also one of the first times that I'd ever also faced death as like a concept, that this character, and not as like, oh, they're dead and that's that, you know, moving on. It was such a pivotal moment. They had a funeral with him. I still have those bagpipes, the sound of the bagpipes in my head. And at that point, it was just like, I need to keep watching because I want to know that it does get better than this. And I also want to keep the memories that I have of these characters alive, because that was the way of how I was going to deal with that grief.
How long was it until you found out that Spock returns? How long did it take?
I think it was a day. It was the next day I was back at it. After I finished crying and bawling, the next day I picked up the VHSs, saw number 3, put it in, and realized that they were bringing Spock back. And then everything was okay.
So you were having like a spoiler-free experience as a child, right?
Yeah,
Just going through the tapes. I
was living the life everyone else had to when they watched Wrath of Khan for the first time. And I got to experience it exactly like them.
Glorious. So just a logistical question here. So this was, you said, in early 2000, in the early 2000s, right? We don't have to put an exact date on it. But at that point, we'd already had all of TNG. We'd had all of Voyager. I mean, all of Deep Space Nine, all of Voyager, and Enterprise was just spooling up.
Yeah.
So at what point in your life did you go back and watch it all? How did that happen? Because you didn't have access to that at that time.
No. So I grew up in a family that we didn't really have channels. We didn't have cable or anything like that. And if you grew up in Canada, you knew that there was only ever one channel that would play shows like Star Trek or any space shows. I think it was just called the Space Channel. It was our sci-fi. And so if you didn't catch it, you were never seeing it again. So we didn't really have cable. We're strictly like an analog family. And then on top of that, my parents were very controlling in what we consumed. So even when like the internet became a thing, I didn't know it existed until much later on in life that it was, I was at someone's house, a friend's house, and they just had the cable on in the background and they were on the Space Channel. And suddenly it came up that like, oh, Star Trek's on. And I was like, oh yeah, I love Star Trek. Let's watch some Star Trek. Go to turn it on. And it was Voyager. And I was like, what? I was like, this is Gerk and Spock. I was like, it looks different. It feels different. There's a woman in charge on the bridge. I was like, what is happening right now? what is this? When is this new? Did this come out? And everyone's like, stuff, this was in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
So it was a little bit of a surprise because, you know, the internet wasn't around. It wasn't a community. If you didn't know it existed, there was no way to find out.
And so how did you get caught up? Were you over at your friend's house just watching Star Trek on cable over at her house or their house, or?
DVDs. I will have to say this, like the era of physical media is what saved me, because then I went out, started buying the physical copies and just inhaling as much Star Trek as possible. And I will say this also was a little bit of a pirate. So when I couldn't find things, physical copies in the stores, then I would go out and I would find them online and watch them that way. And that's how I got caught up on Star Trek. Well, that's how I discovered the rest of Star Trek for the first time ever. It was probably at this point, it would have been like the late 2000s. So after like Enterprise had come and gone,
wow,
was when I started getting into the rest of the series. Like I knew TNG existed, was never really into TNG when I was a kid.
It's okay.
It wasn't, you know what? The reason why I never liked TNG, because my dad showed me one of the movies. He showed me Generations as my first experience with Picard and Company.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
And Kirk dies. And I was like, how dare you? First off.
How dare you? This sucks. I want none of this. Again. I don't want any part of this.
And in my brain, I was like, well, it's Picard's fault. It's the stupid British idiot's fault. He killed Captain Kirk, the beloved captain. I've already had to deal with Spock as a child, and now I have to deal with Kirk. I was like, this is nonsense. I'm not having any of this. Now I've grown up, and my opinions on TNG have changed a lot. I'm much more receptive to Picard. But at that time, I was so hostile to TNG because of the Generations movie that it took me a long time to come back around to them.
I can imagine, especially as a youth, making a snap decision like that. So it makes total sense. So while we're talking about Spock, let's talk about a TOS episode that I don't believe has ever come up on Trek Profiles before, which means I'm very excited to talk about it.
Yep.
And that is Spock's Brain. I have defended Spock's Brain and said, I think it's a perfectly adequate episode of Star Trek, and I find it very enjoyable. But I know a lot of people like to beat up on it. But I want to know from you why this episode is memorable, notable, and what it means to you, Steph.
For me, it was always the science of that episode. Because at the time, and obviously looking back on it now, the science is just not there. But to my impressionable young mind, I was like, a human being can live without their brain. It's like, this is amazing. He doesn't have a brain, but he's up walking around. He's got a weird little helmet on. He's up and going around. So for me, it really connected that point that I was like, science can do anything. It was that sort of mentality that really kind of pushed me to being interested in the science and the medical fields. Mm-hmm. Because if the scientists in the future could pull off weird like that, then we can do anything. Because to me, like, traveling in space is such a topic that, like, oh, spaceships, cool, whatever. We've been to the moon. That's fine. I get it. I was so laissez-faire about the actual space travel, but it was everything else that Star Trek did, you know, bringing Spock back to life, having him walking around without a brain, you know, like being able to create clones of people, everything, all those sort of aspects of Star Trek is what really got me interested and invested in the science of it all. But yeah, and at the end of the day, like, it's a ridiculous episode. And you know what? Star Trek is ridiculous. And that's okay.
I think there's nothing wrong with a little bit of hilarity and a little bit of absurdity in Star Trek. But I do want to say that for those of you who are more into the production side of things, there is a glorious little bit in Spock's Brain where they actually walk in front of the view screen, and the view screen is actually in rear projection. Mm-hmm. And if you pay very careful attention in TOS, you never see them walking in front of the view screen because they didn't have the ability to really do that. And for the first time in this episode in Star Trek, they actually have Chekhov giving a briefing, and they have like the graphic of the solar system up on the view screen, and he's walking back and forth in front of it while the camera's moving. Could not do that. That is actually amazing. that they did that in TV. So if you get the chance, go back and watch that. Even if you don't like the episode, just go back and watch that to just appreciate what they were able to do on a TV budget in that episode. It really is notable, and it makes that episode something special, in my humble opinion. We're talking about Spock. Let's continue to talk about a Spock-related episode in a way. Let's talk about TOS, The Devil in the Dark. Of course, the one with the Horta, the silicon-based life form.
Yeah.
I don't think I want to say too much about the episode. I think people who listen to Trek Profiles already know all about it. So my question for you is, what is the pivotal point in this episode for you? What does it mean to you?
When I am 100% a fan of the Horta. So, and it was also the first episode of Star Trek to ever give me nightmares because of how the Horta just goes around killing people. So I got nightmares from it. The pivotal point for me is when the miners come in to shoot at the Horta and they stop them. And it's all about the understanding of that moment of being like, there's more to the situation. We're not here to just kill things because, you know, they're doing harm. Our goal here is to understand and to help people. And that was such a pivotal moment to me because it connected me to the philosophy of Star Trek overall and what a stance they were taking. Because, and then we learn, you know, it's about the eggs and they're killing the eggs and all that stuff. But what was important was that Kirk was willing to say no, even though everyone had damaged it. Spock had been hurt trying to mind meld with it and understanding the pain. We see some wonderful acting from Leonard Nimoy. But it took those two characters to be like, we need to put a pause on things before we start reacting in anger because there's more going on here than we understand. And we need to expand our understanding to move forward because we're in the wrong. And that's something that's really hard to hear.
Yeah.
And that's a really impressive decision to make because someone coming along, especially in a position where you're a leader of an exposition or just like a human being, to admit that you're wrong, to say things like that and to encourage other people to reevaluate their decisions, especially when other people have already been killed. It was such a fascinating moment for a monster that was giving me nightmares, for then Kirk and Spock to come around and be like, no, we can't respond with more violence to the situation. And I'm off having nightmares about it. And I'm just being like, oh my God, they're amazing. Look at them. This is the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. And they're saying, pause, stop, think. There's something happening. We're actually the villains in this story, not the Horta.
There's a couple of things I always react to in this episode whenever I see it. And one is that I really appreciate the pivot that Kirk makes.
Yeah.
Because he is very much about the business.
Yes.
Earlier in the episode, he's like, we got to get this production facility back up. We got a quota to meet, you know, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But he's very much about the business of the place and getting it running. And Spock is like, well, what if we do this? But Kirk is like, no, we are going to go and do the thing, you know, and Spock says at one point there's something about, you know, we are going to kill or capture. And Kirk is like, we will kill, you know, and he's the one that makes, I think, the biggest turnaround in this thing. And then he brings the miners along with him, which I thought was just great. And I thought that's changing minds and hearts is really, I think, what Star Trek is best at.
Yeah.
And I think that this episode is another great example of what Star Trek is not good at. And I say this with love, and that's world building. So we didn't prep this, but I'm curious for your reaction on it, which is that I think a lot of nerds, and you may have experienced this in your comic book stuff and elsewhere in your various fandoms, that sometimes nerds are very insistent that the world building be consistent and that, you know, there's canonical things that happen in the story and that everything sort of has to integrate. I am much more of the belief that Star Trek is not about that, has never promised that. And if that's what you think Star Trek is about, or even is a big part of Star Trek, you're completely wrong. And this episode is a perfect example of it, to wit. There are people who will be saying things like, the Federation is literally a paradise. And I think to myself, why would these miners be living on this planet in a paradise? This planet sucks.
Yeah.
Why would these people why would they move there to do this? Second, there's lines in the episode where they're actually talking about how much everything costs and how, what their production quotas are and, sort of the economics of the whole thing. So it's hinted very strongly that they're selling this ore somehow, that there's like a market and there's all this other stuff, right? And people are like, well, that's don't look at that. Don't pay any attention to that, right? Yeah. I'm not saying that this tells us something about the world of the Star Trek universe. I'm just saying that I don't think Star Trek as an entity ever really cared about being consistent with these things. I think that in a lot of ways, it's a fan invention that we've imposed upon Star Trek, things we want to see in the world that the show never really gave us.
Yeah. And especially not the original series. The original series was all over the place with its world building. It was very episodic and it was built that way. It was built like a series of short stories in space.
Right on.
So for anyone to think that, like, okay, I will admit that, like, sometimes it makes me angry when things get forgotten in canon, because I've devoted so much of my time and energy to remembering those things in canon. I know more about Star Trek history than I do my own history. But so it kind of does upset me, but also remind me that, like, the world is changing and we have to change with it. So it's okay that Star Trek is getting different. It's okay that it's changing. We have to be able to stop and put a halt to things and pivot when we need to. So we stop trying to kill all those new things all the time. We need to be like Kirk.
So can I bring up something that we didn't prep?
Yeah.
I'm glad to have the chance to talk to you about this because you have an interesting point of view on it, and I'll be curious to see where this goes. You saw episode 1 of the new season of Strange New Worlds?
No, I haven't. But you can spoil it for me. I've pretty much already been spoiled.
Oh dear.
I'm okay with spoilers. I'm totally fine with spoilers.
So okay. So in the episode, Spock and crew steal the Enterprise from Starfleet and go do a mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really all I need to say about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking before the episode began, and I may put that discussion in the bonus material. I haven't decided yet, but it doesn't matter. One of the podcast extravaganza episodes that I did, where I had people interview me about the Star Trek that matters to me the most. One of the episodes that I hold in my heart that, is just very much quintessential Star Trek that I always want to go back to, and an episode I will always watch, is the Galileo 7 from the original series.
Yeah.
Love that episode so much. And there's a lot of reasons for it, which are too boring to go into. But one of the things that I really love about the episode is that it is very much in the episode that it's Spock's real first command. And it goes sideways and people die and he basically gets a mutiny on his hands. And the technical elements of canon, what's the speed limit of warp and how far this planet is from that planet and what's the name of this class of vessel, I have never given a damn about any of that stuff. I really haven't.
Yeah.
But when they do something like this, like Spock stole the Enterprise and took a full-on starship on a mission, it lessens this episode that comes later.
Yeah.
Where it's not really his first command anymore.
No.
It's not really the first time he's got the sole weight of command on his shoulders. And so to me, it lessens the impact that the Galileo 7 had on me, which was an episode that is very close to me and I care a lot about. So there's lots of other examples like this. I think when you do a prequel, this is kind of the danger. So I'm not one of these, canon people. I am not really, but this is the kind of stuff that really makes me sad when it happens. So let me just ask if you want to say anything about that. You can or not, it's up to you.
I mean, I've been viewing Strange New Worlds as an alternate timeline. To me, it's like the Kelvin movies, the J.J. Abrams films they are what they are. There is joy to be found in them, but they're in another timeline. So I can still go back and still enjoy the original series. But I agree because, there is a lot of things that Strange New Worlds is doing that I'm not necessarily happy with for ridiculous reasons, especially like what they're doing with Spock, because his journeys with Kirk and the Enterprise are supposed to be a lot of his firsts. And a lot of his growth is found in these moments. So instead, he's experienced that with Pike and the rest of the crew. So it kind of lessens everything that he does do with Kirk. So I get what you're saying there.
Okay. Well, I say that as a fan.
But I've just had to.
I'm a fan of Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
But it's just something that bugged me.
And I'm a fan as well. And it's just being like, okay, well, Strange New Worlds is a different timeline then, because that's the only way I can cope with it.
All right, very well. So we'll be drinking the copium together, sister. Yeah. We're about it. Okay, so let's talk about another Star Trek episode, another TOS episode, in fact. Let's talk about Miri. This, of course, is the one where Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and the gang find a planet populated with children and no grown-ups. And we have the wonderful Miri, who seems to develop a connection with Captain Kirk. So what's going on in this particular episode for you, Steph? What's it all about?
For me, honestly, it has nothing to do with the children and nothing to do with Kirk. For me, it's mostly about McCoy. It's mostly about actually McCoy and Spock, because they have some wonderful, bantering back and forth. But it's McCoy doing what he does best in a situation where he doesn't have his normal technological supports. Mm-hmm. And he just has to do sort of that like frontier medicine. He has to do some life-saving. He has to come up with a vaccine on his own. And he's such a genius for that. And everything relies on him kind of saving the day in that instance. And this is just one example of many, but I felt like Miri was a big one because he had to self-sacrifice really hard. He injected himself with a vaccine, mm-hmm. which arguably is a dumb decision because, as the only doctor in that moment, if it didn't work, then they're out of doctor. And
right on.
The only one who can come up with the cure in that time. But part of what really pushed me to working towards a career in medicine, because the more I watched the original series with McCoy and Spock, was that I realized, one, I love the sciences, mm-hmm. because that's where I felt like I saw, for me, I was attracted to every decision that McCoy made for the better, even though he was a grumpy old fart, which I also loved him for. But he was doing these things to save lives, and every little bit of life mattered to him so much that he's like, I can't risk someone else's life with this dangerous vaccine. I'm going to inject myself with it. Dumb decision. But in that moment, it was, for me, it was like, oh, that's what it means to be a doctor. That's what it means to be a healthcare provider. Someone who's like, yeah, you put your own health at risk when you go work in these fields. And that was such a big sacrifice to make. And it's played off as like a very like minuet moment. But again, it was just one of those seconds that just really connected with me. And then after that, I was like, I want to be like McCoy.
So it sounds to me like you're ascribing to the blue shirts of TOS, being McCoy and Spock, that they had some influence upon you in your choice of careers. Do I have that right?
You're exactly right. And I'm not going to lie, like, I love the entire original series cast, all of them, but the ones I just continuously obsess over their decisions, what they're doing in every episode, was always McCoy and Spock. Always those two. And then when I got older, I realized that I didn't just like them. I wanted to be them. And then I got into the sciences and I realized how fascinating biological studies were. Mm-hmm. So I got into healthcare field, but I didn't want to just work in a lab. I wanted to work with people. So I became a registered nurse because I was like, that's the next best thing, because I was worried about being too much of like a paper pusher if I became a doctor.
Right.
So I was like, I'm going to become a nurse. I want to work the hands-on treatment. I want to be the McCoy of my generation, minus the grumpiness.
And so I now I have to ask. So when you were in nursing school, did anyone ever ask you what influenced you in joining nursing school? And you like Dr. McCoy? Did that ever happen?
Absolutely. I told them Star Trek at my graduation. I walked across that stage wearing my Star Trek pin, Starfleet medical pin, and the dean of my university saw it. And he lost his mind on stage in front of like thousands of families, because it's just the generic walk where you walk, you get your piece of paper, you shake hands with the dean, you continue on.
Yeah.
But he's just like, is that from Star Trek? And I was like, yeah, it is. He's like, this is the coolest thing I've seen all day. and then we had our moment. I was like, the dean thought it was cool. because of my Star Trek pin. But yeah, no, it was like my main motivator for school. It got me the original series. I put that on repeat whenever I had to do homework because I was like, this is my main push to be in nursing school, to show the things that I want to do, but arguably, you know, on planet Earth, since we're not out in space yet. But I was like, if I want to do this, I need that push. I need that motivation. So here it is all the time, every second of my life. And then I've just become more of a Trekkie because of it.
If you have a photo of yourself in your graduation gown with that Star Trek pin, send that to me and I will put that up on the show notes page, because that is exactly the kind of stuff my listeners would be like, I got to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm so proud of that photo.
Oh, as you should be. I think that's glorious. Yeah. We will put that up on the show notes page, though, at trekprofiles.com. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's talk about a Deep Space Nine episode. Let's talk about Deep Space Nine Facets. This, of course, is the one where we have Jadzia Dax, and she undergoes the Zyantara ritual where all of her friends get to take on the past lives of the Dax character, and she gets to interact with them. Certainly a very interesting episode, a delightful acting episode, too, because the actors all get to do something wildly different. Mm-hmm. But I'm interested in your point of view on this episode and what it means to you, Steph. What's going on?
So this is also the episode where Nog goes through his Starfleet initiation test. Mm-hmm. And Deep Space Nine, I came into that a little bit later because not knowing that, first off, that like this kind of Star Trek existed, watched it the first time, enjoyed it, but then really started to get into Deep Space Nine after I'd say about like 5 years ago. Nog wants to join Starfleet and he gets pushed back from Quark. Rom is like very supportive, but Quark is like, no. And obviously he's the first Ferengi to ever want to join Starfleet, or at least like take the leaps to do so. When I mentioned that I wanted to become a nurse, my very strict family and religious family was more hostile to the idea than anything, because they believe that nurses and doctors are only there to drug people. We're there to give them drugs. We don't care about people. She wanted me to become, you know, working in another field with like naturopathic medicine and like, they're not fans of science. Let me just say that much. They're not supportive of progressive ideals, of people who walk different lives, who walk different walks of life, and they're not fans of medicine. So I wanted to become a nurse. And that really pissed off my family a lot, mostly my parents. My siblings were oblivious towards it. I'd kind of already one sibling in the medical field, but they took it upon me to be like, well, you're going to be our advocate for everything anti-science in this field if you're going to become a nurse. And I said, no. And we got into huge fights about me becoming a nurse. Which you would think, like, which is kind of blows my brain a little bit, because it's like I'm going into the medical field. It's, you know, it's something that like arguably people should be proud of. But, you know, kind of like what Nog was dealing with Quark, and being like, no, it's not for you. You'll change. You'll be different. You need to go pursue this field instead. It's that aligns more with our family ideals, or the ideals that like we have set out before you. And I was like, no, I want to practice medicine. I want to be a nurse. I want to help people. And I got such pushback for it. Mm-hmm. Like my 4 years of nursing school were hell because of my family. And that's something I've had to deal with and work on towards for a long time, because I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD because of my childhood with my family. Okay. As much as my dad was a Star Trek fan, they were also very abusive and controlling people, which goes against everything Star Trek. So when you mentioned earlier that like, oh, he's a purist, and it's like, yes, he loves the original Star Trek because he loves the 60s values, and he doesn't love anything that we have now presenting in Star Trek. He thinks it's too liberal. He thinks it's too progressive. Oh, there's people of like, there's someone who's non-binary. There's a queer character. maybe a little bit of racism in there, maybe a little bit of, misogyny in there too. It's like he didn't want me watching Voyager because he didn't think a woman deserved to serve on the bridge. So like, that sort of mentality. And these were the kind of people that raised me. And it didn't really come out to light until I was in nursing school about how much they were suddenly scared that they couldn't control me if I went into this field. So me going into nursing school was kind of the big detachment I had from my family. And it was one of the last times I think I ever did anything with my family. Was they showed up uninvited to my nursing graduation. And it was really hard because they didn't support me at all through it. They didn't want me to be a nurse. And yet here I was working my butt off to get into a field that they didn't approve of. And they pretended to show up and celebrate that, only to talk bad about it later again.
Did you have health care as a young girl?
No. They restricted access to healthcare. I think I saw a doctor once in my entire life growing up. And that's only because I was hospitalized. So yeah, I'm Canadian. So, we have free healthcare in a sense, but yeah, we did not have access to healthcare. Everything I learned about healthcare and medicine and science, I learned through shows like Star Trek. It was one of those where like media did end up raising me as much as more than anything. And I think that's why I'm such a big Trekkie, was because Star Trek was like one of the few shows that were true. Star Trek and Star Wars, actually, I'm gonna name.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're allowed to. Yeah. Cause I'm also a Star Wars fan, but it was like those two kind of things were allowed in our family. My mom didn't like it, but my dad loved Star Trek. So it was okay. But it just meant that I had a very narrow minded upbringing, that I really had to relearn how to be a human being, a decent human being, when I went to nursing school. Because, nursing school was all about, you're going to experience people from all over the world. We have a very diverse group of people here in Canada, because Canada is made up largely of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So they prep you for that. And it's just like, okay, it's cool. It's like being on Star Trek. It's like being on Deep Space Nine. And that's the sort of mentality I had to get into, because I had no other way to learn how to be a person with ideals, and a person who had the capacity to care about other human beings. I had to learn it all from Star Trek and shows like Deep Space Nine, because what I learned from my family was just how to be like hateful and how to judge everyone around me based on appearances or based on how they made their life choices. And it's like coexisting wasn't a thing in their mind. So when I watched Deep Space Nine and I saw Nog kind of have to push back against everything, all the Ferengi ideals, and he had Rom to support him, which I absolutely love Rom for. But I had quirks in my life. I had people like Quirk who was just like, we're going to sabotage you. We don't agree with what you want to do. You're better off just being in the field that we chose for you and existing in this way in life, because the world out there is not something we approve of in our thinking.
And so your parents wanted you to study homeopathic medicine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I profess ignorance about how things work in Canada as far as college education, but did your parents have to pay for school?
Oh, no. I paid for myself.
Good on you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I did everything myself. So it was a very rough time. And I just remember core memories of, it's 3 a.m. I'm sitting on the floor, binders and textbooks surrounding me, and I've got Star Trek on the TV in front of me. And I just remember thinking, like, this is it. Star Trek's got my back.
Sounds like Star Trek saved you.
It did. I think Star Trek raised me. And it started off as just a show that I watched and I enjoyed and imprinted on as a child. And then, I kind of forgot about it as a teenager. It was just a show. And then I went to nursing school, and Star Trek became the thing that I was like, I'm having a bad day. Star Trek. I need to learn how to talk to this person or de-escalate a situation or get around like a big ethical issue I don't understand. Star Trek. I became that person where Star Trek was always my answer. Like just borderline obsessive, I would say. Like I still had a life, but I was like, Star Trek's going to raise me. So we're going to watch the entire shows, all of them from start to finish. So I started with the original series and got my way through all the Star Treks in nursing school.
It might surprise you to know that this is actually not the first story I've heard like this on Trek Profiles. Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's
heartbreaking. That is heartbreaking to hear. But...
It is heartbreaking to hear. But I think it's also part of the power of the show.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of one of the things I've discovered in the podcast is that this pop culture bubblegum popcorn entertainment show really has had an outsized impact on people's lives. I would draw people's attention to the episode I did with Janae Fowler. This was somewhat early on, but her family was a full-on cult.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And Star Trek was the only show that her mom would let her watch. And she grew to question the cult and is now anathema to her own family, and she's written on Medium several articles about this. So if you have an interest, you can go back. It's all linked on the show notes page for Janae Fowler's episode if you want to go read her Medium articles where she talks about this. But it's heartbreaking. Yeah. But I think it's amazing that the show has had this ability to touch people, and it's something I'm always surprised about. And pleased is the wrong word, but I'm always amazed that it's just had this impact in the world. And that's the part of Star Trek that I think has always surprised and amazed me, is when it sort of breaks out of the screen and makes things happen in the real world. Because everybody has their fandoms and people like certain things, and people like a certain comic book or whatever. But here's the show where people are making significant and unalterable life choices.
Yes.
Because of a sci-fi show.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me every time I come across a story like this.
It's honest. It's not something I expected. I didn't expect to be that person who was just like, why are you invested in this and this? Why did you choose this career? And I'm like, well, because there is a sci-fi show from the 60s. I don't know if you've heard of it. But I became a nurse because I wanted to be like Dr. McCoy, but minus the attitude. So I'm a nurse.
So you became a nurse, and let's continue on. I think it's weird the way that these episodes have lined up. I think the M5 put them in a certain order. I think it was very, very clever. Yeah. So well done, M5.
The M5 appreciates.
Let's talk about another Deep Space Nine episode. Let's talk about Nor the Battle to the Strong. This, of course, is the one where Jake and the Doctor are on the shuttlecraft and they get diverted to a planet, Agilon Prime. So what's going on with this particular episode for you?
So I don't know if you heard, but back in 2019, we had a little bit of a global event called the COVID-19 pandemic start.
What was that again? I better make a link for that in the show notes. People may not have heard of it.
Yeah. So the COVID-19 pandemic starts, and where I am working becomes the designated COVID unit, like right away.
So you were working at a hospital or a treatment facility?
I was working at a hospital, do bedside nursing, acute medical care. So just a traditional medical hospital. And then it quickly became the designated COVID unit, which was not something we were prepared for. So in this instance, I was Jake. I was every Starfleet personnel that you talk about these things in school. You mentally train, you do battle simulations, you do psych evals, you do everything. And then you're finally thrown into a pandemic that no one's prepared for because it's global and it's a big surprise. Mm-hmm. And we're also not ICU trained. We're not intensive care nurses either, but didn't matter. We were lacking in resources globally. So they quickly just threw us into the fire and we're like, go. Which meant that for the next 2.5 years, I was a frontline COVID nurse, which you can imagine was a hard time because people died. And, gonna get a little dark here, but people died not well. The thing with COVID is that it kills your lungs. Mm-hmm. You have the alveoli, which is what brings the blood flow into your lung field. and that transport the oxygen in and out. COVID creates little clots in your lungs and kills these alveoli. So you're not having that oxygen transfusion that's occurrence that's happening in the lungs anymore. So you can't breathe. And it affects your whole lungs. So when you look at x-rays of someone with COVID-19, it just looks like, what's the best way to describe it? It honestly just looks like someone with glitter threw up on an x-ray. And that is what your lung looks like, because it's just little dots and holes. It's not a clear picture of a clear lung at all. And when you have something like that, that means that when you can't breathe, it's not because you don't have enough oxygen, because these people are getting the max amount of oxygen we can safely give them without sedating and intubating them. Mm-hmm. And that's what we would do on our floor. We wouldn't intubate, but we would give them high flow oxygen, because anything more than that, and we're having to put them in a coma. They can't breathe. And as you can't breathe because that oxygen transfusion isn't happening, your oxygen saturation just starts dropping and dropping and dropping ever so slowly, because you don't have the capacity. You no longer have the reserve. Your lungs just aren't able to inflate as much as you can. Doesn't matter how young and healthy you are. If you get hit with this and it's able to get into your lungs, you could be a healthy 29-year-old and still be struggling to breathe. The best way to describe it is it's like you're drowning. You just can't get oxygen, and it is a slow death. It's a very traumatic death. Movement makes it worse. You get up to go to the bathroom, your oxygen's going to tank at like 50%.
What's a normal number?
A normal number is you want to be above 94% for a healthy person, maybe 92% if they have recurring health issues. But like 100% is your oxygen level. That's what we want, is 100%. 92 to 100% is a safe range. If you're dropping to 60s and that sustains, it means at that point, you're not getting oxygen to the brain and you're going to have cell death. And this sort of cell death can be in the brain. It can be at vital organs, because immediately what happens is when you can't get enough oxygen, your body starts preserving what it can. So it cuts off oxygen to certain vital points of your body to try to increase the perfusion to your brains and to things like your lungs. So it'll cut off everything like your bowels, everything that's not essential at that point. So you're not going to be eating. You're going to feel like really tired, lethargic. Your senses are going to start getting dulled. You might be like happy, oddly enough. We had a lot of happy hypoxics is what we called them, just people who were like pleasant because their bodies just were no longer getting oxygen. So it was almost like they were getting a little high, but it just meant in that case that they were like at a solid 70%. And that means oxygen's not getting to the lungs or to other organs, and that those organs were dying and would eventually lead to full organ failure. Most cases, though, they would just slowly suffocate to death before that happens. And so this is what we watched on this unit happen to people over and over and over again. And all of us are sitting here being like, we're not trained to do this type of care. We're not trained to give this type of care that people need who are this sick. And I don't just mean like physical and medical care. I mean, these people are dying. They're in an isolation room. They're cut off from friends and family because at this point, we still didn't know how it spread. Mm-hmm. So we were taking all the precautions. So we're wearing like full suits, masks. Like I'm wearing like a full like mask respirator, covering every inch of my body pretty much. And we're the only people that can see them and take care of them.
Hospice wasn't your area of specialization for sure.
Hospice wasn't, neither was intensive care. So they'd come in and being like, this organ's failing, this organ's failing, this organ's failing. And I'm like, I've got 10 other patients who are all dying at the same time. It's triage medicine time. And on top of that, we don't have intensive care beds. So if they do need intensivist care, there was one night we had one ICU bed in the building. And I had 2 patients that desperately needed that bed. And I just remember having a conversation with the doctor, and we're just having from the beginning, we're like, okay, what are your odds that you think this person's going to make it? What are the odds that you think this person's going to make it? And it was just a back and forth conversation of us trying to figure out who gets the last remaining bed, because the person who doesn't is dead. And unfortunately, then there was a trauma that night, so neither of them got the bed. And these were the type of things that I was not trained for or mentally prepared for, to have to make these kind of decisions in a bedside hospital and to see it repeated over and over and over again. It was a really rough 2.5 years. And this is going to be another instance where I'm like, Star Trek saved me. Because during this time, my good friend Marcus, who I had mentioned earlier, we started watching all the Star Treks again. We did our watch party for the first time. And I would literally come home from work or have a day off work, and we're all isolated because it's COVID. And it would just be like, cool, I watched someone die a slow agonizing death today. Can we watch some Star Trek together? And it was just one of those instances where it's like, I needed to connect with something. And since it was really hard to connect with people, it ended up being Star Trek. And it ended up specifically being Deep Space Nine because of just because in Deep Space Nine, you have the Dominion War.
Yeah.
And you have characters going through things that they're not prepared for, they're not trained for, that they think they are. You get the Starfleet personnel who are terrified. And that's what we all were. We were all scared, not knowing what was happening, but being told that you are a person's last hope. And you can't miss anything because you walk away for 5 minutes, that person's oxygen tanks, they're dead. And you have an entire floor of that. And you're just one person. And it's like, yes, you have the support of your colleagues, but the amount of time we had people show up to work on the COVID floor and saying, oh, this is the COVID floor, I can't work here, and leave, happened more often than it ever should have, because they were scared too. And they just ran away. But for the rest of us, it wasn't an option. We had patients to take care of. But it was also some of the hardest stuff because, I had seen terrible things before. I'm a nurse, it's not unusual to see something. But when it becomes your everyday, and it's this mentality that this is a global phenomenon and you're the front lines of it, was mentally destroying. And then so when all the characters on Deep Space Nine were all going through their Dominion War experiences and some handling it better than not, it made sense. It was one of those instances where like, oh, thank God someone else is experiencing it too. I don't care that it's Star Trek. I get it though. That character in the one episode who ends up panicking to Jake, one of the Starfleet characters.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm not ready for this. I've never related more to a random person because I felt that same way. I just didn't shoot myself in the foot.
Are you able to rewatch the episode?
Funny you should ask that. No. I have not watched that episode since I watched it during the pandemic.
I bet it hit you differently.
Yeah. I think I'm almost scared to because I don't know how I'll react seeing that now.
I understand.
Because it could be fine. It could just be another Star Trek episode in my brain, or it could be something that's just re-traumatizing again. Being like, remember that time when everyone was too scared and you didn't have a choice and you had to go watch people die one after another very slowly and painfully all alone? I don't know if I'll be able to watch it. I want to. I really badly want to do a Deep Space Nine rewatch, but I don't know.
Are you still a nurse?
Right now I am. Recently this year, I switched units to leave the COVID unit. And that is when the PTSD hit me. So I've been getting treatment for a PTSD diagnosis from the years of working the COVID front lines. And it has been extremely difficult journey trying to get the support and treatment I need for that because of everything that I saw there. And I'm not the only one who's also taken stress leaves. A lot of other people I know of as well. A lot of people have switched careers entirely, left the medical field entirely because of what they saw and what they had to deal with. We're having a real hemorrhage of nurses up here in Canada right now. No one wants to stay in the field anymore because of everything that we went through. I'm still a nurse though, and I'm still going to keep trying to be a nurse. But unfortunately, I've had to deal with the folly of being a nurse with PTSD now.
Is that why you also wanted to talk about It's Only a Paper Moon?
Yeah, because much like Nog, ever since I've been back, it took coming back after getting, in this case, Nog hurts his leg. And in this case, it was my brain with the PTSD, but I went somewhere else. And then I realized how fragile everything is. I don't have a holodeck to escape to, but I so badly want to. But for once in a long time, like Deep Space Nine dealt with PTSD. Star Trek dealt with PTSD. A television show dealt with PTSD and the things that happen and the escapism that you seek. And while I don't have a holodeck, Star Trek's always kind of been my version of the holodeck for escapism. And so whenever we go through a dry spell when there's no Star Trek, I have to go back and rewatch something or just kind of find that sort of mentality to keep me going, because my PTSD is very undealt with and I'm working for it. I'm actually going to be involved in a PTSD treatment program in the fall for healthcare workers. So I'm hopeful that that'll have some good results for that. But it's just one of those things that people don't get it. People really struggle to understand PTSD, and they really struggle to understand what we saw during COVID, because to them, they just had to stay at home, but not for the rest of us. We had to deal with everything on the front lines, and we had to watch things get very dark very fast. And so now it's almost like hitting a wall, trying to explain it to people, because no one wants to understand. But I also know that running away isn't going to solve everything. So it's one of those instances where it's like, okay, the reason why It's Only a Paper Moon is so good is that I can show that to people who are also Star Trek fans. I mean, like, remember this episode where Nog got hurt and then struggled to really come back from that? Just pretend it's me, and it's me watching tons and tons of people die, and the moral injury that I've had because of that.
Do you feel like it's something that in your training that they never adequately prepare you for? It's all about the medicine, but then there's this self-care aspect that seems like it seems like the self-care aspect is a hole in the training.
Yeah. It is something I know they're getting better at teaching, but I think self-care doesn't matter when the demands of a job are more than a person can handle. You know, they tell you to do things like take care of yourself, exercise, eat well, see a therapist, do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're working 12-hour plus days, you work nights, you deal with tons of things, the last thing you can do is take care of yourself. There's just no room in this field to take care of yourself when you work in a hospital. It's impossible. Unless you have a supportive partner who's willing to take on half the load, it's impossible to take care of yourself. There's the resources aren't there. The time's not there. You have to pay for therapy out of pocket. And it's just like time and money that you don't have when you work in this field. And honestly, it's like people don't care until after it's already too late to stop the problem.
We've talked extensively about how Star Trek has been a constant presence in your life, Stephanie.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how you've been through some very challenging experiences in your life, and Star Trek has been sort of your Vic Fontaine.
Yeah.
To help you through some difficult times. But I'm just going to put the question to you very simply. Why does Star Trek matter to you? What has it meant in your life?
Star Trek is the moral compass I need. Star Trek is the parents I never had. Star Trek is also my support network, my friends, my family. It has been there for every important part of my life that I can't deny its effects in my life. And that's why it's important to me, because it has always been there when it's mattered, and it's always been able to speak to me through its episodes when it's mattered. And it's never going to go away. I'll always have Star Trek. It's just that sort of foundation that I need in my life.
So it sounds like Star Trek's been a good friend to you.
Oh yeah, it's been the bestest of friends.
Well, I just want to take a moment before we jump into the Kobayashi Maru just to thank you for your various efforts during the pandemic. I can't imagine what it's been like. The only analogy that I might have is I work a lot with veterans.
Yeah. And
so I know a lot of veterans, and they've had a lot of particular issues which are of a similar kind.
Yeah, I bet.
And so I can't say I understand, but I can say that I do have empathy for that. And I just want to thank you for your efforts, because it mattered. even the smaller things that you probably didn't even notice, but it mattered to somebody, including the families of the people who were involved. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
But it is now time for you, Stephanie, to face the Kobayashi Maru.
Okay, I'm ready.
Are you sure?
Absolutely. I've been studying hard. I've been reading my notes when you weren't looking.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5.
Okay.
Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 is going to award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready, Steph?
I'm ready.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record our guest responses.
Simulation ready.
Question 1. I'm not feeling well. What are you going to prescribe? Lexerin, synaptazine, or trianoline?
Trianoline.
Best piece of Star Trek medical tech. The neurocortical monitor, the biocomputer, or the psycho tricorder?
Biocomputer.
Best looking sickbay. The 1701 refit, the NX-01, the Voyager, or the 1701D?
Voyager.
Why is inoprovaline the best medicine? Tastes great, less filling, or low carb?
Low carb.
And finally, what's going to be on the final exam at Starfleet Medical Academy? A pre-ganglionic fiber or a post-ganglionic nerve?
Post-ganglionic nerve.
Simulation complete, M5. Please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
The M5 is working.
Steph, I am pleased to tell you the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Yes, I did it. Ha!
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Stephanie is awarded the title of Medical Researcher at the Central Hospital of Altair 4.
So there you go.
Yep, sounds great.
So, Stephanie, why don't you tell people where they can find you, where they can follow all your various podcasts, where they can take you to task if they disagree with any of your answers in the Kobayashi Maru?
Yeah, so if you want to debate me some Star Trek, you can find me on all social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, even Twitch at Steph Gerk. Gerk is my last name. You can also find me at stephaniegerk.com. And you can actually hear me weekly on the Debrief Weekly Report podcast, which is a weekly news recap of all the science and tech news that is coming out into the world all day.
And we'll have links up to all that stuff on the show notes page up at TrekProfiles.com. Stephanie, thank you so very much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your extensive epistles of enjoyment, your massive missives of malevolence, or selfie videos of yourself cosplaying a Con Vindicta mashup to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be put into a shuttle and launched right into the maw of the Doomsday Machine. This time, I'll leave you with a quote from Mr. Spock, who in the episode Miri said, quote, "I never will understand the medical mind," close quote. Thanks for listening and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
You do? Well, I just started two brand new things, so I'm not sure how much time I'm going to have for this. I accidentally came across a Star Trek online, not the MMO, but a Star Trek online role-playing game played by email, where we send stories to each other. Basically, we write our own massive fanfic together in a cooperative sort of way.
Oh, that's amazing.
I had to go to Starfleet Academy. You have to go through a training set of simulations before they let you join the group. So I just got into my group and right before we began recording, somebody sent me something I'm going to have to respond to later today. So
that's amazing. I love that for you.
It's very nerdy. It's deeply nerdy.
That's okay. I'm starting a Star Trek RPG online. That's going to be international coming in August. So,
oh my God, what rule set are you using?
We're using the Star Trek Adventure rules.
Mm-hmm.
other than that, I'm not the DM, so I'm just kind of like anything goes. I just want to show up and RPG in the Star Trek universe. But our
Very
players
nice.
are like in France and the States, Canada, and I think in the UK.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Time zone negotiating is going to be fun.
So we've been running 5 years now, so which is kind of cool, you know? So
Same.
yeah.
Yeah, because I went to look at your episode list and I was like, there's a lot. Not that it was a bad
78.
thing. It was just how do you
78.
choose?
Well, that's the great thing is that they're not there's no sequence to it. You know, every episode is a one-off. So what I tell people is you can pick any episode that has a person's name and just listen to it, and then not listen to any others. Listen to them all. Listen to the ones you're interested in. Listen to the ones that are people you know. You know, ones where the description interests you, but you know, you don't have to have listened to any of them to make sense of any of the others.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie, BC is absolutely beautiful. You're going to struggle to pick a good one.
Oh, I know. I've been.
So many.
And in fact, I'm going to be back. I'm going to be back
Are you?
in next month. Yeah, my wife and I were going on a cruise. We're going to stop in Victoria.
Nice.
So we'll see. Yeah. We're going to go to the gardens.
Yep.
And we're going to go to high tea at some fancy castle place.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was told those were the things to do.
Yeah, we're X-Men films.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's probably at that. It's probably there.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love
It's
it.
Xavier's Castle.
Oh, that's glorious. All right. Well, I'm going to have to take more pictures then. So anyway, that's neither here
Unless
nor
there's another
nor-
castle I don't know about that someone just built and calls a castle. They do that sometimes.
No, it's some fancy place there that's
Not
called
the Parliament building, is it?
in BC. No. If you want, I can look it up. Let me see.
Yeah, please. I'm very curious now. I have to judge what you're doing in my country, in my province. Is it the Empress Hotel?
I guess it's this Cragdarock Castle.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a different place.
I don't know. My wife arranged all this.
It's fine. It's not a castle. It's a fancy home. It's a fancy house.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, my wife arranged it. I'm not sure.
It's very, don't worry. It's very beautiful. It is not the X-Men castle though, hotel place. It looks like a fancy mansion.
So I did a controversy on the Twitter a few months ago.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. Nothing too spicy, I'm afraid. But I said, I'm going to be in Canada. I'm going to be in British Columbia. And we're going to this. She arranged this place for dinner while we're there. And apparently they're known for their poutine. And they had 3 different kinds. And I was like, never had poutine. And, you know, I'm going to be in Canada, going to have poutine. Which one should I have? And man, the Quebecois came after me. There is no poutine outside of Quebec. You are not eating poutine. You are eating some British slop, you know. Do not eat this, you know, go do something else. How dare you ask this, you know? And I mean, it was like the Quebecois were going hard, man. They were mad. They were big mad.
I mean, they have a fair point. If the poutine is very different. It's still, I would still call it poutine if you're eating it properly in Canada. But the Quebecois are very opinionated about everything.
Yeah. So anyway, I did a little controversy there, so I thought you might enjoy that. And so I'd rather have your best take than your hot take. Well, the reason for this, honestly, is because this is the kind of show you only get to come on once.
Yeah.
So There's
no do-over for me.
Yeah, you know, for any of my guests, really.
Wait, does that mean I hit my peak life? This is it?
If this is your peak life, I'm so sorry. I wish I had brought a cake or something. I did not. I neglected to do that. All right. Any questions for me?
Wait, so I don't get my title until the end, right?
yes, that's correct. That's the last thing.
So I have to stress the entire episode about what my title is going to be.
Oh no, I'm looking at it. It's already here. I got it. It's already done. But the M5.
But I won't know until the end.
No, you won't know until the M5 tells you.
Oh,
you won't know
okay.
until the M5 tells you. But you will know at the end of this recording. You will have.
Can I debate it?
Sure, if you want. I mean,
because the official Star Trek Twitter did give me a rank and a role and a title.
Yeah. I got one of those too.
So well, then there you go. You know, if I'm not happy with it.
Yeah, no, I get it. Totally okay. It's so much better. Okay. Any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, issues, problems, challenges for me?
Am I allowed to ask you a question if I just have a thought? Okay.
Yes, of course.
Great. Cool. No, just during a recording, if we're talking about a topic and I'm just like, what do you know about this? Or.
And so it was like a series of mini interviews. And, the problem was like, even if I give you just one episode to talk about, like we're going to spend 25 minutes on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the episode just got to be preposterously long. So I broke it into 3. So like that podcasting extravaganza is me being on Trek Profiles, and I had to break it apart into 3 different ones. So if people really have an interest, I was like, go listen to that. Like that'll tell you.
Like, here's 10 hours.
Here's 10 hours of me going on at length about all the things I enjoy in Star Trek. So
amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if most people are into that, but then I come across people that are like, no, I listened to the whole thing. Yeah. I was like, that's amazing. I feel like I should send you a prize. And in fact, your fellow Canadians are gnashing their teeth because we just became the Stanley Cup champions in the hockey. Oh, you're giving me a look.
No. Which does not make any sense to me. You guys don't have ice there. Like, whatever, indoor rinks, I know are a thing, but my people literally grow up on ice. So how does this happen?
Let me tell you something. I mean, I'm not going to derail this, but actually, yeah, I will.
We can derail.
So you got to go back to 2017 to October. And October 1st was the Route 93 Harvest Festival.
Okay.
And you're like, what the hell is that? Why is he talking about this, right? So it was this big country music festival here in Vegas.
Oh, okay.
And what happened was this guy, for reasons that we still don't know, 6 years later, conducted the largest mass shooting in American history. Right here in Las Vegas. Yeah. And that was October 1st. And he, and we still don't know why he did it.
Yeah.
It was probably the lowest point in the city's history, certainly since the MGM fire back in the 70s. And this certainly exceeded that, I think, in the consciousness. And the Golden Knights began to play 2 weeks later. That was their opening thing was 2 weeks after that.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Knights came to town, which I shouldn't even say came to town because that implies they came from somewhere. They're not. They're an expansion team. They didn't move from someplace. They made a decision intentionally, and this is before any of this. This is like when they were just having meetings in an office building saying we're going to have a hockey team in 2 years, right?
Yeah.
They set the team up in such a way that they said our target market is not tourists. This is not a team for tourism. This and so it's like their hashtag and like one of their big sayings. Like if you look at any of their marketing materials on their website, it always says Vegas born. That's their thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole idea is we're like, okay, our team is going to be deeply involved in the community. And so when the Knights started playing, they went on in that first season to have probably the most successful expansion team first season in professional sports history.
Yeah. All
professional sports, right? I'm not saying that that's absolutely true, but I'm saying it's a reasonable case you can make, right? Yeah. And it's hard to overstate what that meant for the city.
Yeah.
Especially because it happened 2 weeks after this monstrous shooting. And the Knights have just been super embracing of the community. And God, I can't believe we're talking about all this sports stuff, here on Sports Talk on Star Trek Profiles. Now you compare that to the Raiders.
Yeah.
Now the NFL team, the Raiders I make a joke of it, but I always refer to them as the California Raiders because they are specifically set up to not be involved in Las Vegas anything.
Okay.
The purpose of the Raiders being here is to get people from Northern California and Southern California to fly in for games.
Mm.
So what do I mean by this? How this just seems like an assertion, right? So here's an example of what I'm talking about. I forget the number, but like a 50,000 person stadium. How many parking spots do you think it has?
Oh, probably only for like a couple hundred.
2,000.
Maybe 1,000? 2,000.
2,000 parking spots for a 15,000 person stadium, right? Now you think to yourself, how in the world could you build, because the stadium is not meant for people who live here to go to the games.
Right.
It is specifically designed for people staying in the hotels. So it's on the other side of the highway from where the hotels are.
Yeah.
So like when the Raiders are playing, they shut down the auto bridges across the highway, and then the guests can use those as pedestrian bridges to walk to the games and back. So the Raiders are specifically not part of the community intentionally. It is that was their pitch to the city, is like, we're going to bring in all this California money, you know, and they're going to come and gamble and stay and, you know, buy stuff and then go back home. So it's a team meant for California people that is here as a tourist attraction. It's not part of the community. So that's probably way more than you wanted to know about this.
Hey, I'm learning tonight. I'm okay with that.
But anyway, we are here to talk about Star Trek. So, okay, where were we?
Did I choose Spock's brain?
Yeah.
God, why did I do that to myself? Okay.
Because you said McCoy and Spock as characters that impacted my decision to become a nurse.
I know. I remember that now. I'm just past me, Stephanie. I know I picked that one as a challenge.
So, but you know what? There's no judgment here. We celebrate whatever you pick.
I'm judging me.
Whatever you pick is the right thing. It's okay.
Yeah.
Boom diggity. We're done. Was that okay?
That was great. That was good.
I mean, you know, sometimes when I have people on and they've not listened to like most of the episodes, like they don't realize, like, sometimes we get into some very serious stuff on the show, and that's normal. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know,
I know part of me was like, do I want to talk about this? Okay, we're just going to talk about it.
No, you absolutely should, because if that's the part of Star Trek that is true to you, that's legit.
Yeah.
You know, that's the part you talk about. That's the reason you pick the episodes. And if that's how it touched you, then that's okay. Yeah. You know, but it's important to me that my guests always have a good experience on the show. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I try to have
no, I had a great time. It was very welcoming. You're very easy to talk to, which is amazing.
Oh, thank you. I don't know. Could you say that again for my wife? I want to record that. I want to play that back.
I said you're easy to talk to. I never said anything about your listening ability.
Oh, dear. You figured me out. So we have this recurring joke, which is because it's based in reality, where she'll say something to me like, go buy me some lettuce.
Yep.
At the store. And okay. So I come back with a head of lettuce, and she's like, why the hell did you buy this? I was like, because you told me to buy lettuce. And she's like, I never buy a head of lettuce. Why would you buy this? I wanted shredded lettuce in a bag. And I was like, because you didn't ask me to buy shredded lettuce in a bag. You just said buy lettuce. This is lettuce, you know? and so then I have to like shred it and put it in a bag.
Just to make her happy. There you go.
Because I totally misinterpreted what she said. So I was like, I did the exact thing you said, and I'm in trouble. I recorded a podcast episode 7 or 8 months ago with a guy, and he just released it today on his show.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, I barely remember this. I barely remember doing this.
Meanwhile, I'm used to I have a 24-hour turnaround for the Debrief Weekly. So I'm just like, you guys get time? You get time to edit? We got 24 hours before it has to be out and gone.
You know, when Trek Profiles is making the magic happen, it's because, like I said, Star Trek is breaking out of the screen, making something happen in the real world, and people going to their graduation with Star Trek stuff on. That's A+. That's A+ content right there. That's what we want.
I should have mentioned I'd come off a night shift that morning too. I was sleep deprived, hadn't slept, had to sit through a 4-hour graduation ceremony.
So I'll be in touch. All right. Okay. Anything else?
No, it was such a pleasure to meet you.
It was a pleasure to meet you. And if you ever come down for STLV, just let me know. You know, I
2024.
Definitely, I owe you an Altair water or a Romulan ale or whatever your usual poison is.
Romulan ale.
So I tell you what, you like Romulan ale, you should go on the Star Trek cruise.
I am considering it.
That thing is nuts.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
All right. Anyway, you have been very generous with your time, Stephanie. So thank you so much. I will stop recording.